Hi everyone, welcome to today's lesson, which is about Paul, the Apostle, and his final days. So just to remind you about Paul, last week remember the story of Paul and Silas and how they were in prison and they were actually freed and were able to continue telling the stories of Jesus. Paul himself did not always believe that Jesus was the Son of God and that he died and came back to life again. But Paul had a miracle happen on the way to Damascus. On the road, all of a sudden, one day he was going along, and there was a bright light, and Paul was blinded by the light, and he heard a voice saying, "Why do you make it so hard on me?" And Paul realized that it was Jesus speaking with him. And after that time, Paul became a different person. He totally changed the way he thought about Jesus. And he became the best apostle in the world to tell about Jesus and his love. Paul traveled very far by himself and with his friends to spread the word of Jesus' love, and he was often in trouble for telling the stories about Jesus. For example, when he ended up in prison with Silas. But somehow God always looked after Paul. Why? Because Paul loved God and Jesus and was passionate about telling more about him, and having other people learn to love God too and change their ways. I'm going to tell you about another adventure that Paul had. So this was yet another time when Paul was in prison. He was often being held in prison, and not because he'd done anything wrong or bad, but because certain people didn't believe what he was telling them about Jesus. But Paul was very brave, and he continued to tell the people no matter what happened to him. The powerful leaders decided to send him to Rome, which was a big city many miles away across the sea. It was in the fall, and the sea was very dangerous. And I just wondered if any of you have ever been to the sea or to a big lake when there's a big storm and the waves are high and it's very dark and it can be very scary. Were you ever in a boat in the storm? Some of you may have been, at least in a little boat, and I just wondered how you felt about that. Paul tried to tell the men on the ship that it would be dangerous, but no one listened to him. Finally, as the storm got worse and worse, the ship's crew decided that they better try and find an island where they could stop and be safe. But instead, the ship crashed. What do you think happened to all the men on the ship? Well, none of them died. Why? Because God had told Paul that he would look after all the men. The men made it to the island, and after a few months of waiting on the island, they were taken by another ship to Rome. And during all of this, Paul continued to do miracles just as Jesus had done, healing people and telling them all about Jesus. Paul never gave up telling Jesus' story, even when he was beaten, hungry, and treated badly and often in jail. Does anyone know what the word brave means? Do any of you know anyone who's been brave? And what makes you think they were brave? Have you yourself ever felt that you were being brave? And what was the situation? I'd like you to talk this question over with your moms and dads and your sisters and brothers. And next time we meet, maybe we can talk about it together. I'm going to tell you a story about myself. When I was very young, I was very afraid of the water. I'm not sure why, but I just didn't like going into the water. My mom knew I was afraid, and she was worried that if I didn't ever go into the water, that I'd never learn to swim. And that's a really important thing to know. So she had me take swimming lessons, which I know that many of you have done. And even though I'd taken lessons, I still found it really scary when I had to go into the water. But I had a very good teacher who encouraged me and always told me how brave I was when I tried new things like floating on my back and treading water and all those things that you do when you learn to swim. In the end, I learned to swim, and I did feel very brave myself when I was finally able to jump into the water and could actually swim. Sometimes we feel afraid to do something, but we do it if it's safe, even if we don't feel like it. And that's what it means to be brave. And Paul was very brave in many things that he did. Even though he might have felt afraid inside, he knew that God would look after him. So I encourage you to be brave like Paul, and also in sharing your love of Jesus every day. Before we go on to our activities for today, I just wanted to tell you about another little skit that we're going to see shortly. Do you remember during Sunday school, sometimes we have a little skit between Scooter and Beth? Well, today they have a special story for us about being shipwrecked. And I wanted to show you this picture. I don't know whether you can see it very well, but in here there's a ship, a big ship. You can barely see the mast, and you can see the sea, how big it is and dark. And so you are going to hear about Scooter and Beth's experience.
Ahoy, matey!
Ahoy?
Welcome to me ship, arr! Hoist the mainsail!
So, today you're a pirate.
You can call me Captain, Captain Scooter Gray.
Okay, Captain.
Wait a minute, what is this? It's a storm! Whoa, did you feel that?
I did, Captain. Here comes another.
Whoa! It appears the storm has passed. Great job, first mate.
Phew, I'm glad we weren't shipwrecked.
Oh, me too.
During his adventures of telling people about Jesus, Paul was once shipwrecked on an island.
That must have been crazy.
Yes, but it didn't stop him from spreading the word about Jesus. Paul spent his whole life serving God, even when things happened that could have stopped him.
Oh, like shipwrecks?
And beatings and prison. Paul just kept serving God.
That's the kind of person I want to be. I want to serve God me whole life. I won't let one little storm stop me.
That's the spirit, Captain.
Looks like you've earned your hand at the wheel, first mate.
But where are we going?
Where the open sea takes us. Life is an adventure when God is with you.
It sure is.
Arr!
Arr!
So our activity today is going to be about making a little ship. Now I've got two parts to the activity. The first one is making a ship. It's a little bit harder than the second activity, but I hope that you can try this one as well. So what we need for this activity is a piece of construction paper. I used a dark piece because this is going to be my ship. And I have a stapler, and I have some tape, and I have a couple of popsicle sticks. Either I have thin ones, but you can use the thick ones too. Or some of you may have a piece of doweling like this. It's just that can act as the mast on the ship. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to fold this piece of paper long ways like this in half. So I'm just going to do that. You can't see what I'm doing, but I'm folding it in half, and I'm going to crease the edge very well. Then I'm going to open that up and fold. Take that piece of paper and fold one side to about 1 inch from the other side and make another firm fold so it's not, looks like that. Then I'm going to turn the paper around and do the same thing. Take the edge and almost about 1 inch from the other side. It's hard to see when it's dark like this. And then make another firm edge. So what we end up with is a piece of paper that's got 3 folds on it like that. So it's the 3 folds that are actually going to be form the bottom of the ship. So we can take and bend the center fold in a bit. Then I'm going to actually going to cut a bit of the top of the ship off because I found that it's a little bit too high when I've been doing this craft. So I'm just going to cut the edge off about 1 inch to half an inch off. Then I'm going to make the shape of my ship. And it's got a curved, so I'm going to make this is the bottom of the ship, so you want it to curve like that. So I'm going to cut this corner off like that, and then I'm going to take my stapler and just staple those edges. You can use tape too if you want it to look a little bit neater, or for the staples not to show. I'm having a little trouble with my stapler here. And then when I get to the bottom, I'm going to actually take and just staple the bottom of the boat to the side of the boat on each side. I'll show you this in a minute. That just adds a little stability to the bottom of the ship. So I've got little staples in like that. So this is what it looks like. And then the bottom will be flat, so it will stand up. So now we have to make the other end of the ship, although there are some boats that look like that, but we're going to make this one look even on each end. So I'm going to cut the corner off so that it's rounded like that. And do the same thing, staple around the edges, and then staple the bottom piece underneath. Okay. Now the thing that we have to do right now is, and you could probably do this earlier too, I'm going to put a piece of tape on the bottom, the flat part of the boat, like this. And then I'm going to just cut a little tiny hole that is just wide enough for the sort in the center, just wide enough for the popsicle stick to fit through. A very thin piece. You can't see very well, but I've got a little tiny hole there, and that's where my mask will fit in, whether it's this one, and I'll use this one for our purposes right now. If you are doing popsicle sticks, you'll probably have to attach two together, one on top of the other, and I have a little boat already made here. You can't see very well, but I have popsicle sticks. Two of them are attached with tape, and then I've put the sail on. So you can use either. I'm going to take this little piece of doweling and put it in the ship, and I've got this other little piece across that will hold it so it will stand up a little better. Now I do let that go through the bottom. Normally that mast wouldn't go through the bottom of the boat, and I have been using a little piece of Play-Doh to sit my ship on so that it will stay upright. So there's this, and sometimes you may have to actually tape the mast in so it stays straight. I'm just going to use a little piece of Play-Doh here to stand my boat on. There we go. Now, the other thing that you might want to do is to add some seats into your little boat. And the way that you do that is you use probably a little piece of cardboard would be best, because the cardboard will hold the sides of the boat out. You can't see what I'm doing here, but if we put the seats in, put it across, then it'll hold the boat out. Now I'm going to use a piece of cardboard. I'm just going to cut a narrow strip off the end. It's probably about 5 inches long. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to bend down the outside so that the middle is about just so it'll fit into the ship like that. Okay, so I'm going to fold one end in. I'm going to fold the other end in about the same amount. And then I'm going to take some tape and put it, whichever works best for you. You can put the seat in like this and tape it on the side. So let's do it that way. That might be easier rather than working underneath. So I'll put tape on each end of this seat, and I'm just going to put it in the boat like this. I don't know that you can see, but you can see how the seat holds the boat apart. Now that's not normally what happens, but in our case that's what's going to happen. So we've got a seat, and then of course we need a sail for our boat. So we can take a piece of paper. This is a 8 by 11 piece of paper. You don't need anything that big. I'm going to fold this in half. And then I'm going to make this about half. I'm going to make this sail about half the size. So I'm going to cut it in half. What you want to do is to be able to take the folded side and put it around the mast like that. So I'm going to cut this in half. Like this. Now, sails can be either square like this. On big ships, they're often this way, or they go all the way across the mast. But for our purposes, I'm going to make it a triangular sail. So I'm going to make another cut. And then I'm going to take a piece of tape. I've got my stuff all over the table here. I'm not being very neat. And I'm going to tape the sail onto the mast at the top. I'm going to tape the corner. And you can use other ways too. You can glue, whichever works for you. And I'm going to tape the sail on here at the bottom of the sail around the mast. Okay, this is pretty crude. You can make it a lot nicer when you've got more time to put this together. So this is what our little boat looks like now. And I have, so as I say, what I used was just, you can see a little piece of Play-Doh underneath to hold the ship upright because it tends to want to wobble a little bit. And I'm just going to show you some of the other boats that I've made. I'm just going to turn the camera around for a minute so you can see over here. I don't know if you can see the ships. There's two of them there. And I've put a little bit of material, it looks like water, and one of the ships, this one here, you see how it's got the seats? It's got two sets of seats inside, and so does this one. So you can have little ships and you can play with them, and you can make little people to fit in them, and you can be just like, have a ship just like Paul.